Okay, so I am sorry about last week's lecture. I did finally get a new video done, but you'd be surprised it's hard to carve out another 3 hours to lecture. But I don't know exactly what happened, except it froze when I started Camtasia recording and everything was working. And I think when I plugged the HDMI cable in, it just stuck with the keyframe and didn't record anything else. So it's just audio for those of you who are trying to follow along at home. I think it was Marcia who pointed out that it was hard to follow. So I did finally get to it. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, like Star Trek, the non-motion. Okay. So I'm sorry about that. I did fix it this time. I plugged in the HDMI before I started the recording. So hopefully, like every other time I've ever recorded, it will work. But that was very weird. I've never seen that one. That's a new one. So, all right. So today we're going to talk about some general principles, scales, and axes, and these sorts of ideas. Maybe back to this problem. Okay. Oh, you know what? I know what the problem is. Okay, thank you. All right, and we'll get the trellis displays, which I think I told you last week. The last few weeks I've been saying, I'll talk about trellis displays. We'll talk about it today, finally, and clarity of plot elements, that sort of thing. Next week, as I think I've mentioned before, I will not be here, so I won't be here for office hours. And I won't be here for the actual lecture. I have recorded that lecture and I've posted it, so it's available. It's shorter than normal, in part because it was a natural place to stop for the end of the first half of the semester, but also in part to give you some time, extra time to work on your projects instead of listening to me drone on in a video. Which I know I'm very exciting to listen to in person, but my daughter tells me I'm really boring on video. Actually, she says I'm boring all the time, but in particular, I was editing a video once, and she was looking at my shoulder, she said, "You're really boring." Okay. But anyway, I think videos are kind of hard to watch anyway, of lectures. Anyway, all right. So, clarity of data. So, good plots make the data stand out. I've said that before. We want to make sure it's easier for the reader to decode. I'm going to say that over and over and over and over again. And avoid unnecessary junk. Now, we want our plot elements to be large enough so that we can distinguish the data. So, here's an actual example from an actual. Let's shrink this. Get it too big? Yeah, it's better. From an ARL. If there are ARL folks here, I'm not picking on ARL. I just happened to pick this graph because I saw it and I thought, wow, that's really bad. Many things wrong with this graph. But I think the most striking thing is when your eyes first fall on it, what do you notice first?
Zigzag.
Maybe. My eyes see the grid. That's the first thing I see. I don't see data. I see the grid, right? But yes, there's also this zigzag. They've drawn lines through it, but I'm not sure why. I don't know what the lines mean. And of course, if I want to make a comparison, like performing fine arts to agriculture, I'm really just reading the number and comparing the number, right? So I redid it. I think that's easier to read. So there are a number of things about this. Of course, I've done this trick of sorting, and I'm using a bar chart. I'm not drawing lines through them. So the bar is giving me the double encoding. Also, the grid lines are there, but they're not getting in the way anymore, right? So when you look at this, the first thing you see is the data. I think I'll be less than humble and say I think when your eyes hit this graph, the first thing that comes to mind are these black rectangles, which is the actual data. Right?
Can I ask you a question?
Yes, of course.
About the previous one?
Mm-hmm.
Were the axes reverse, percentage, and discipline, or is that how you want it to be?
I'm sorry, say that again?
So the x-axis, the x one says discipline,
Oh, no, I screwed up.
Oh,
Thank you.
okay, I was just.
I should fix it. You know what I did? I talked about this last week with the chord flip. I chord flipped, but I named this, I should have, this is actually the x-axis, right? So I screwed up. I should have, yeah, thank you. I will fix it.
I was just wondering because I saw that the x-axis goes up to 15%. Is there a rule, by the way? I was wondering because I'm scaling some of my own stuff.
Yes.
So you start with 0.
Right. So let me answer the question technically and then answer the question you're asking. So you can, of course, create whatever limits you want using, in this case, it would be ylim. This is actually the y-axis. Ylim, and it's just a function takes a minimum and maximum. You can set it to whatever you want and not let ggplot figure it out for you. You can do that. But the question you're really asking is, what's the general rule of thumb, right? I don't know that there's a good rule of thumb. Obviously, if you make it very large, it's gonna be hard to see the differences, right?
Well,
Because everything's gonna be shrunk.
that the differences are small, and now you make it seem like the differences are large?
Well, I think stopping a little bit past the top bar is perfectly reasonable. If your point is that 12.81 is not that different from 11.51,
But it seems large right now, and I'm wondering, because I've been doing that myself with some of my data before, where I was like, well, let me just scope it a little bit, and so you can see the difference a little bit more, but then some of the readings went into, it's kind of a no-no.
I think it's a judgment call. If you were to put this from 0 to 100%, then everything would be hard to read because it would be very small. So
In a way, you can argue that's skewing. And I mean, it depends on perspective. If you want to make sure that they think that there's no difference, then yeah, put it to 100. But if you want to see that there is a large difference,
it's a good point. I think you could be misleading either way, depending on what your message is, right?
Yeah.
If you're trying to convince people that these are massive differences, then doing it this way is in some sense deliberately misleading, right? But if that's not your message, you're just trying to get them to look up these values, and this is easier because you can see it, right? On the other hand, if you want to make the comment that they're not very different, then then putting from 0 to 100 is almost all white space, right? And so you're deliberately, like you're pointing out, you're deliberately making a lot of white space in order to push all the data down. I think everything, it depends on the context of what you're trying to say. But I mean, the nice thing here, I guess, is by including the actual percentages right here, the reader for themselves can see, oh, well, that's not that big. Right? Also, what is big, right? I mean, a 2% difference in respondents may not be that big, but a 2% difference in the amount of people that in a local area that have instances of cancer because of a nearby nuclear reactor accident, you might think 2% is big, right? So, but yeah, it's a good question. I'm dodging it. I'm not going to answer that question, but I think as a general rule of thumb, it is not unreasonable for the top just to be a little bit above the highest data. That's pretty standard. Moving the bottom is more disruptive because of the encoding problem. Yeah. So sorry, that's a good question. I'm dodging it. All right, so no grid lines at all makes it hard to reference the data. It's really hard to figure out what is this. I've got to track it down to the axis and make my best guess as to where that is, right? On the other hand, very prominent grid lines distract us from the data, right? Now I see grid lines rather than the data, right? So I can emphasize my plot elements, make them bigger if I want. I can even de-emphasize the grid lines if I want, and they're still there. So those are some options available to us to make this choice of emphasize data over non-data elements, for example, right? Another way to do it is this way, which is the way ggplot2 does it by default. And the idea here is that since I'm using basically a gray background and writing with white, my eyes can completely ignore the grid line if I want to, but I could actually explicitly use them if I want to. there are some downsides. So one downside is that Tufte would be mad at you, right? Edward Tufte would say, that's all ink. It's ink, 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 and that's not data, right? Okay. The other thing is, I don't know if you've ever tried to render plots like this, or small, thin, white lines in a light background before, but you have to get the width of it just right, right? It's very easy for it to bleed and it'd be hard to see or go away, right? So getting that right can be tough in many cases. So that's another downside. Tufte has another solution for this. He says, do this. These are called rugs. So here, if I want to know what that is, there's a corresponding tick here that tells me exactly where it is. There's a corresponding tick here that tells me exactly where it is. Right? That's fine if you don't have a lot of data. If you have a lot of data, then all these really do is give you distributional information. They don't mean anything. If you care, there's a geom rug, so you can do rugs yourself if you want. Should have put that on a new line. So ggplots, and then this is the points plot. This theme BW flips things so that it's black on white. Not flips. It gets rid of the gray. And then I got rid of the major and minor axes by setting them to blank. That's, I guess, all new. For bar charts, Tufte actually suggests this, which I actually kind of like. So there are no grid lines, right? They're implied by drawing these white lines through everything, right? And this has a lot of advantages, not the least of which is it's very intuitive, right? It's this block on top of this block on top of this block. We're used to thinking about stacking blocks, at least those of us who were given blocks as children. And then I have a particle block or whatever. So there's some advantage, and I'm not using any ink at all for the grid lines, and yet I can see what I need to see in terms of this. So it's not a bad solution. And here's how I did this in ggplots. I did a regular bar thing, and then I used this H line, which is horizontal line, and I set the y-intercept from 0. This sequence. I showed you what sequence does, right? Okay. The sequence, the seq function says start at something, go to something, and step by this, or you can actually say step by this and let the final vector be this long, or there's lots of options, but it produces a sequence. In this case, from 0 to 150,000 by 25,000. I colored them white, and I set the width, and everything else I just set like this. So it literally just drew white lines through it. So you could argue it is ink. This is white ink, I guess. But I did it again for this class. This is this class. Modeling and Sim students, masters in doctoral, computer science, and so forth. That's what our class distribution looks like, in case you're curious. All right. But I guess there's one other thing to say here. So by drawing these lines this way, one nice thing about this is, each of these blocks is a person, so it's very intuitive, right? In that sense. And it's not unusual in the infographics world to see graphs like this, except they're literally drawn as cartoon people. I mean, people have seen that before, right? So I would say don't do that. Because it's really hard to understand what that means from a visual perspective. That is it area, is it length, whatever, the height of the person? What is that? In this case, it's the length of the bar that's what's relevant and it's very clear. All right. Of course, sometimes we have a lot of data and we have a lot of overlapping data and we have to figure out what to do about it. It can be difficult to read. There are a variety of solutions to that, so let's talk about some of those solutions. We can reduce the size of our elements, but only so much. At some point, we make it hard to see, right? I've been telling you, emphasize the data, not de-emphasize it, right? I can remove the fill color or use transparency. This makes understanding distinctions a lot harder. I can use different colors or shapes for things, but again, only so much. When I have some overlap, sometimes there are jittering approaches we can use to separate data so we can see them a little better. But at the end of the day, maybe if you have a lot of overplot, you should really start thinking about, should I separate this data? What is the point of this plot, right? And if the point, and we'll talk more next week about having a clear objective when you make a plot. And if the point of your plot is to understand, say, the distribution or something at a summary level, then maybe use a summary statistical method instead of all of the data, right? So here's an example. This is from that wine data. You guys have seen this data taken one of the homeworks, right? Okay. So different classes of wine here. So in this case, I've chosen to not have a fill, so you can see the overlap here, but it's still hard to see, right? See all these differences. This is how I did this, by the way. Shape 21. So it's circle. Oh, yeah. Okay, good. In this case, I've jittered it. So since these are discrete positions, it's not or discrete values. It's not so important whether this particular thing is right here or not. So I jittered them a little bit, right? So they're easier to see individual points. And I use geom jitter to do that. And there are some parameters so you can control the width of the jitter, but I'm taking the default. So I'll say the downside to this is now it becomes hard to see where the boundaries are, right? So maybe I color them, right? So now it's easier to see the boundaries. And I can see almost every point. There's still some overplot, right? And that's how I did that. I just said fill line type.
How does it know where to put each of those lines when you jitter them? Because it seems very random, or are they random?
It's random.
They are completely random.
Yes. But I guess backing up again, I'm going to flip through the slides really, really fast because I know you guys really enjoy the animation of the slide. So if I'm looking at a graph like this, let's forget the fact that I have no idea why somebody would plot this graph except that they're teaching a data visualization course and they wanted to show an example. But if they were putting a graph like this together, they clearly have a point. So you hope, right? They have an objective. And if it doesn't really matter what specific exact line this is, right, versus this one, clearly it must not, because I'm not labeling it. Then what am I looking at? Am I looking at the overall? Is it important that they're distributed in a particular way, or what is my objective? And if my objective is really just about the distribution of the data, well then maybe I should be summarizing it, right? That's a lot easier to read. If all I care about is how these things distributed, then something like a box plot is better, right? So if you're getting a lot of overplot, and if you're really trying to get all of those data elements on there, you might start to ask yourself, why do I care about the reader seeing all of these at one time, right? And if the answer is because I want them to see a distribution, I want them to see the overall picture, maybe there's another plot that's simpler, right, that does that. And this is how I did that. I did the box plot and the chord flip. Sometimes you just have to break the data up. There's just no way, right? If I'm going to put this on a slide, for example, as I have done, there's no way I'm going to put 50 states, in one big, huge bar plot very easily. But there's a definite disadvantage to breaking it up, right? I create this lookup problem. Moreover, it's not a very efficient use of space, right? This is repeated, and this is repeated. Each of these, I've done a good job of keeping all the axes on the same basis, although they're not the same width here. Not sure why that happened. But anyway, that's bad. They should all be the same. But anyway, so I'm replicating this, which I needn't have done. I've introduced all this white space, which I needn't have done. And the cost of that is that I can't have as much graphing space, right? So everything gets compressed. It's harder to see the differences. Right? I'll come back to that point. All right. So sometimes I can use transparency, right? So now I've added a little transparency here, so I can, where it's darker is where there's overplot, right? So I'm not just erasing data, I'm stacking the data, if you will. So here I used alpha of 0.4 to do that. Or just make the data point smaller, right? But again, there's only so much you can do, right? You can only make them so small before they're not visible anymore. Here I just set size 2. Shapes and colors. So here's our favorite iris data set. My X and Y axis labels are not terribly good in this case, but oh no, it's not iris, is it? I just made this up. This is fake data. Sorry. Not fake news, fake data. So, but in any event, using the shapes and the colors, it makes it easier, but I still get these overplot issues, right? So you can only do so much. Here's my fake data, and here's how I did that. I changed the shape using shape and using color. So maybe if you're getting these overplots, you want to separate things, right? Now this plot is more interesting because this y-axis, I didn't need to replicate the y-axis in every case. As long as the scales are the same, I'll just run across them and I'll put them all in panels side by side. So they are 3 separate plots, right? But I've kept the baselines the same, I've kept the scales the same, and I've used my space efficiently, right? And in this way, I can see all 3 things separately. I still get some overplot within one group, but at least I'm not seeing circles on top of triangles and things like that, right? So sometimes separation is best. I'm going to come back to this idea of a compromise between multiple plots. All right. So again, as we talked about before, having lots of lines on a plot is challenging to see. This is not even that many. This is just 4. But I've chosen line type and color. I don't know how you are, but for me, there's only so many different line types before it's just all noise. I can't really distinguish the difference between this and this that easily, right? So maybe just separate them. So again, if you're going to produce separate plots, maybe you can do something efficient by creating these panels where everything has the same consistent axes and scales, and you can reuse those labels so that you can get them as close as possible and improve the lookup problem, right? Now it could be that you still have a lot of line graphs, and maybe you have one baseline comparison. In my field, I'm often running many algorithms, and I'm comparing them against my algorithm, right? So I could see a plot like this, maybe where my algorithm is on every plot, right? And a couple of other lines are on each plot, or maybe one other line is on each plot. So I can compare mine to everything, because that's the point, right? Mine is better than yours, right? And I don't care if yours is A, B, or C, mine is still better than yours, right? And that's okay, right? Doing things like that is okay. It does create a little bit of a lookup problem, but that lookup problem is mitigated a little bit by the fact that we're all sharing axes, right? And even better if you provide a reference in this case. Which leads us to this idea of trellis displays. That's what that is. That's a trellis display. So trellis display separates plots into separate plots, but as we've talked about, separating onto different plots creates the lookup problem. Now I have to look at this data on this plot and reference that and remember it for this other plot, right? But too much data on a plot gives me clutter, so it makes it hard to read. Trellis displays are really a way to try to compromise between the two. They really are different plots, but by keeping all the axes and the baselines and so forth the same, we can put things close together, save ourselves some white space so that we can use that space for actual data, and make the lookup problem just a little bit easier for our reader. We use the idea of a facet in ggplot to do trellis displays, and the way that we tell ggplot how to do those panels are by using the models that we described 2 weeks ago, right? The language that R uses for those models, right? The formula. So here I've gotten this birth weight data set. This is a little trick, by the way. If you've never seen this trick, there's maybe a more R-like way to do this, but I'm old school. So this is some vector that contains however many items. In this case, 2 items. I'm going to reference it with a set of indices. So smoke is a Boolean value, so it might be false or it might be true. However, R, like every programming language I know, treats false like 0 and treats true like 1, right? So when I have a false, it's going to be 0. I'm going to add 1, so I'm going to reference 1, which is mother didn't smoke, right? And when I have a true, it's going to be 1 plus 1 is 2, so I'm going to reference mother smoked. So when I'm done with this, I'm going to be left with a factor, and in each case, when you saw false, it's going to say mother didn't smoke. When you saw true, it's going to say mother smoked, right? I include that just so you can see how you can do things like that. All right, I'm going to make a histogram, and here's the facet part, right? So what this is going to use a facet grid. So the two are facet grid and facet wrap. I'm not going to talk much about facet wrap. I'll get to it maybe in the second half of the semester when we start talking about a concept called small multiples. But facet grid works like you might imagine. Think of the set of panels as a grid, right? And we're going to treat our response variables like the rows in that grid and our explanatory variables like the columns in that. So this is going to say smoke as explained by everything else, and so we should see them stacked, right? The panels stacked, and that's what we see. Right? So mother didn't smoke, mother smoked, and they share the axis, so I can leave a gap here, etc. Right? If I wanted to go the other way, so that they were side by side, I would have said dot tilde smoke, right? So that was one example. Here's another one, the miles per gallon. X is my displacement for the engine displacement. Y is highway miles, I guess. And then I'm going to do a scatter plot. So each panel is a scatter plot, and in each panel, X is the displacement and Y is the highway mileage, right? But I'm also going to add two other variables in here using this trellis mechanism, right? The drive of the car, what kind of drive, it's got forward, rear, and reverse. And then the class of the car, like SUV, etc. So drive, as explained by class. So the rows are going to correspond to the drives. The rows of panels correspond to the drive, and the rows of class, columns, are going to correspond to class, right? And this is what I get. So this is a pretty easy way to get a plot like this, I think, right? And we can see right off the bat, like there are no two-seater, four-wheel drive cars at all, right? There are no minivans that are rear-wheel drive in this data set anyway. Maybe there aren't at all. I don't know. No forward front-wheel drive SUVs. Is that true? I don't know cars. But anyway, so you can so backing up just a little bit, the X and the Y are for each plot, right? Each plot is that X and Y, right? And the formulating that we're doing is giving us the columns of the rows, right? There's a bar chart. My X is going to be the manufacturer. My Y is going to be the highway mileage. I'm going to use facet grid. The year of the car is explained by everything else. So manufacturer, height is the miles per gallon on the highway, and there are two years represented in this data set. We can see the change in, say, from 1999 to 2008 in Volkswagen highway miles. I guess it's an average, maybe. Can't be. That must be total, all of them. That's all of them added. That would be a very bad car. Or very good car. Yeah. All right, so, yeah. Okay, so, this is another example. This one's using bar charts. Again, miles per gallon. Yeah, so I'm going to use cylinders on X, miles per gallon on Y, and the facet's going to be gears, number of gears in the car, as described by everything else. And this is what I get. This is a distribution of cars with 4 gears and 4 cylinders. Right? I got 6 box plots on here. Now, the nice thing about the trellis display is that, at least the mechanisms for doing trellis displays, sometimes they're called panel plots in ggplot2, is unless you know something about how to tinker with the facet parameters, by default, your scales and your baselines will be the same. That's the point of them, right? So you can't screw it up unless you want to, right? You have to consciously decide, I'm going to break this, right? Which is good, because they should be on the same scale most of the time. Unless you have a compelling reason for them not to be. All right. So, as I'm sure you guys have already detected, I'm a big believer in repetition, so you're going to see things like this a lot. But place things that you most want to compare close together, and the things that you care about comparing less, further apart. Encode data that requires the most nuance in terms of differentiation of numeric variables in ways that align with our pre-attentive processing the best. Save the things that we're less good at for the things you don't care about, subtle differences, right? Label all your axes. Now there's actually an argument with some data visualization people that there are times when you don't label axes. I don't subscribe to that point of view, so I tend not to do it. But it is ink, but my view, I've never seen a compelling case where failing to label the axis was better than labeling it. But all right, but don't clutter your plot with tons and tons of labels. It makes things hard to read, that's for sure. And don't let the non-data elements obscure the data elements, both literally, but also in general, like that first example we had, where you look at the graph and the first thing you see is grid lines, right? Annotating point things. Use legends or keys or annotations to clarify differences. So here's an example, our population and income for states. So I can look up the states. So here's Florida, for example. So that's nice, but it's cluttered, right? And if the point was for me to be able to see that that's Florida, maybe there's another way, right? Don't put the point there. The text satisfies the point. And I still got overplot, right?
But there's a way to deal with this, right? In ggplot, you have text repel option, right? So it helps you to plot it without any overlap, the text itself. It's John text repel.
Yes, but then the data won't be where. So you can do that. The repel works great as long as it's not encoding the number directly, right? Because it moves it, right? Whereas this is encoding this number and this number. So if we repelled this, they would be giving you the wrong answer.
So I used this. What it does, it actually uses a 9.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah, I suppose. I mean, if you have a lot of those, it's going to be distracting. But yeah, maybe you could just a few. But that's a good point. Thank you. This is how I did this. I used John text, and I set the label to this abbreviation. And it works the same with the text. Okay. Adding reference lines, points, regions, etc. to contextualize your plot can be useful as long as you're not adding too much clutter. And you can add annotations to provide an explicit context. Remember, we want to draw our reader's eyes to the most important part of the plot that conveys your message, right? You're trying to tell a story. And so, to the extent that this does that, that's good. To the extent that it gets in the way, it's clutter, right? So, supposing we had a plot like this, which is the number of people in the armed forces, thousands in the United States over time. We could have just had this plot, but if you're writing let's say you're writing some essay or story or blog post or whatever you're doing, and it's about the reasons behind the changes in the number of armed forces, wouldn't it be interesting if you put the Korean War right there in it, right? there was a reason why the number of troops increased then, right? So this is how I did this. I used this geom-rect, and you give it the min-max, etc. I put it first so that it would be written on top of. I set the alpha to 0.3 so I could still see the grid line behind it. And then I use geom text here to write 3 and more. But probably the annotate feature would have been the better way to do it. I'll talk about annotate later. Here's the same plot, but I deliberately made the fonts really small. So I have very weak eyes, I have contacts and reading glasses. So and as old as I am, I had bifocals by the time I was 22 years old. So when people do this to me in plots, I get very annoyed in papers. Graduate students, when I'm reviewing their papers, I will circle it angrily, bigger fonts. And they'll say, can't you just zoom in? No, paper doesn't let me zoom in. But so it's worse than I can't read it. You could annoy your reader, and maybe you don't care, but if you're writing that paper to a conference and you want your paper to be accepted, I think annoying the first set of readers is a bad idea. So yeah, so here's a plot I put together. Any politician, I'm not going to get into politics per se, made a claim in 2015 that the murder rate in the United States was the highest it's been in 50 years. The claim is completely and totally false in every conceivable way. So I went to the FBI crime database and I got the murder rate for the United States over time, and I plotted it, and that's what these are, the murder rate of the United States. So you can see that, yes, there was an uptick in 2015, but overall, we're not only much better than we were in the 90s, it's half what it was in the 90s, right? So that is only part of the story in my mind. The other part of the story is this. You could say, oh, well, we're much safer than we've ever been. And in fact, if you draw this line back, it turns out that it was not this low since 100 years. So this is about as low as it's been in 100 years, the murder rate in the United States. Yes?
I was wondering for, like, based on the do we consider if it's, can we say it like it's badly created? Because, like, most things are printed in black and white.
Mm-hmm.
So, when talking about the midterm and this stuff, can we consider, like, things that look very colored, but maybe possible to read in black and white? Like, if I were to print a paper or document.
Let me split that into two answers, right? I'm not going to print your slides and look at them on a black and white photo, right? But in general, you should consider color considerations, I think. Unless you have lots and lots and lots of colors, it's not so hard to find a color palette that will translate well onto black and white. I mean, maybe offline, send me what you're talking about. We can look at it in specific context. But yeah, in terms of colors, you want to make sure the distinctions are possible. And I would say, in most contexts, that includes printing on paper. Maybe not for a presentation, though, because you control the presentation. Anyway, send it to me and we'll look at it that way. So part of this is, okay, you could say, well, we're really safe. We're safer than we've been in 100 years. Safety is solely determined by murder rate. Except that the murder rate in the United States is actually very high relative to other countries, right? We're on par with Kazakhstan. I don't know if you're aware of this, but if you look at the databases of murder rates in the world, it's like United States, Kazakhstan, right? So I thought what would be better to contextualize this is to show, well, this is other in our hemisphere, right? Here's Chile, here's Bolivia. And I think most Americans would not think, oh, well, these are very, very safe countries, right? Maybe, I don't know, you get to decide for yourself. But so this plot, I'm not trying to convince you of anything politically, but I'm trying to convince you of something visually, and that is the purpose of this plot is to convey context. So the reference lines and the text here is all about context, right?
And the reference lines are means or averages?
Yeah, these are the reported averages by the world, yeah.
For 2011, I see.
Yeah, for 2011, yeah.
Why did you choose 2011?
I was just grabbing data. Yeah. So, yeah, that's a good question, but this is from the FBI data set, and this is from, I can't remember where I got that. I probably have it in code. But in any event, so it may have been that that's when it was updated last. That's when I could get that data national. And in some sense, it's fair. I had a student last year point out these are not fair comparisons because the FBI counts things differently than other international organizations do in terms of what is an intentional homicide. And that's true. It's going to be a little off, and maybe a more consistent number would have been better. So there are reasons to quibble with this graph for sure. But the point of me putting this graph up is to show the idea of providing reference lines for context. So yeah. So no, 2015 was not the lowest murder rate in 50 years. But it was a high murder rate. But that's because we have a high murder rate in the United States. Okay. So I didn't put it here. There you go. But you probably did it. I use this annotate. Annotate allows, there are lots of different things you can use annotate for. One is to put text on, which is what I've done here. You can also do line segments that way. Later on in the semester, I'll show you uses of annotate where we use line segments and all sorts of interesting things. So where it is X, where it is Y. This V just and H just works the same way. R will try to center things. So if you have something like text, the center of the text this way and the center of the text this way is where that point goes. But you can say, no, don't do that, justify it this way. 0 is, for vertical, is all the way to the bottom, and 1 is all the way to the top. And for H just, it's the left and the right. So you can move it around so that, in other words, the point that it's actually sticking the text on is at the bottom of the bottom center of the text. Does that make sense? All right. So that gives you some idea of how you provide context to help tell a story. All right, so this is the fun part. This is where we get to make fun of other people. So, all right. So obviously we want to draw our data to the correct and a consistent scale where possible. We want to reduce inaccuracies. We don't want our reader to do more math than they have to do, not because doing math is bad. Doing math is good. We should all do more math. It's fun. But because we don't need to, we have computers to do the math for us, right? If our point is to convey data quickly and efficiently, making our reader do math for us is counterproductive, right? So unless that's that's your goal, it's a pedagogical and andragogical goal. And then we want to properly adjust our baselines, etc. Use consistent groupings, etc. And we said all this. Okay, so yeah, into the thing. So this is a fun graph. First thing I notice is that that doesn't look like 81%. Perhaps slightly less subtle is that doesn't add up to 100%. Even more interesting, this, if you follow this line, doesn't actually go through the center. I don't know if that bothers you, but there's some OCD part of me that says that's not good. This is clearly not a graph, right? This is just an image somebody made, right? The fact that it looks kind of like a graph is incidental, right? Here's another one. So the comma, for Americans, the comma is a decimal point. So minus 0.5%, positive 0.5%. This one's positive 0.5%. That doesn't make sense. So 4.6 minus 1.6 minus 5 minus 0.1. Confusing. I think even if that's right, even if there's a legitimate reason why that's so, unless you really understand, this graph is very confusing, right? And almost certainly it's not right. So here's another one. In principle, there's nothing really wrong with this, except that if my goal here is to compare these two cars, this goes from 600 to 700, this goes from 200 to 300. So not very easy to compare. This is probably my favorite one. These arrows mean nothing at all.
I mean, they were very clearly calling out those labels, though.
But they're confusing, right? Why? Why? I also love this nice tan color on the background. That's fantastic. This is a really nice one. You like my snarky little title. So not only does this lay this out in a circular pattern, which makes the bars harder to see and compare, but they don't start in the same place, right? It's not like they start from a consistent place. So how am I going to compare this to this? They don't start in the same place, right? So that's not a good plot.
They don't all join in the middle?
Oh, well, maybe they do. I don't know. Maybe they're supposed to. Is
Just
that,
understood.
what?
Just understood.
Is that, it wasn't understood to me. I mean, they do have the percentages, but like I've said before, if you just look them up, if you're just looking at the numbers, then I could have had to use the table, right? I didn't use the graph. Okay. So just a couple of things if you've not seen them. WTF-Viz is I won't expand the acronym, but is a fun little feed that shows you lots of fun examples of really bad data visualization. The best part is often the snarky remarks at the bottom. I've seen one where there was a pie chart that added up to like 110%, and the person wrote, now a 10% extra. So, but they're fun to make fun of. There's another Tumblr feed where what's going on is people were writing their R code to do some visualization, and they had a bug, and it produced something pretty, so that they posted the pretty visualization up so you can see. Some of them are kind of cool looking. So that's a nice one. So these aren't necessarily bad visualizations, they're just fun little things to, you guessed it, they're fun to. Okay, scales and axes. All right, so the question of how to set the aspect ratios for your line graphs is a challenging question, right? If the aspect ratio is not right, it will dramatically change the perception of the graph. This relates similar to March's question about the bar chart top end as well. So in this case, you know, these changes look dramatic. This is the same exact data, but I've squeezed the y-axis, so they don't look so dramatic, right? So the question is, what's the right way to do it? And the answer is, it depends on what your message is, but be careful. Because if you're dramatically changing aspect ratio to, say, fit your graph into a paper, like it would be better if it were squished, right? Keep in mind that you may also be either, in the worst case, misrepresenting the data visually. In a slightly not so bad case, you might actually be, you know, working counter to the message you're trying to get, right? So I had certain space constraints, so I squished this down, and then under here I say, you know, there are dramatic changes between 1970 and 2010 or 2011, right? Well, I just squished those dramatic changes, right? So we don't want to lay the aspect ratio out in a way that's contrary to the very point we're trying to make. On the other hand, we don't want to deliberately make the aspect ratio exaggerate something just to be right. Right? I could have also made this, you know, very tall, and then it would look really dramatic, right? So, you know, there's truth in advertising.
Usually, the journals or conferences that try to publish and will tell you what is the aspect ratio required for the paper. And in this case, if the aspect ratio in your plot doesn't show the significance, you just manipulate the numbers. What do you do with that?
Oh, no, you never manipulate the numbers.
No, I
don't think I understood the question, but I'll answer that part of it.
So what I'm saying is that, like, skip the 8,000, make just the jump directly from 4,000 to 12,000, and it's
Oh, I see. You show just the peaks or something like that? Or, I mean, as long as you're clear about what you're doing and why, I suppose. But I mean, most of the journals I publish in, I have control over the size of the plots, how I want to do it. Moreover, you could still end up with this choice because you could end up stacking things, right?
right.
But yeah, I mean, regardless, you want to be truthful, right?
Yeah.
At the very least, be truthful. And also keep in mind, I guess the point is not to tell you what's right, but keep in mind that changing, you know, these things will change the look and the inference of the reader, right? So keep that in mind. And this is like the third time I have this slide. baseline is 0, blah, blah, blah. Sometimes there are some reasons to change that, but really you shouldn't unless you have an extremely compelling reason to do so. And if you do, you should be very clear in your article or your presentation why you did it. Okay, skewed data, right. So sometimes when data is very skewed, it creates this problem that you end up with a lot of overplot in one portion. So if I expand things, then the things that are at the extremes go way out, and that's hard to deal with, right? So the question is, how can I manage this data when I want people to see? So there are several ways to do it. One is consider separating them into plot. Here are the long tail values, here are the rest of them, right? Another way to do it is with a log plot. Try not to break the scale. I'll show you what I mean by that in a second. If you have to break the scale, make it very clear that you're breaking the scale, right? And that they're not on the same scale. So here is a log plot is population versus square miles of states again. And the problem here is we've got Alaska that's way out here, right? And California. And it pushes all the data down in here, right? Population does the same thing, but I'm only doing log in one direction right now. So, so log has this. So everybody know what I mean by a log plot? Right? Instead, here we're jumping 0, 200, 400, etc. Here I'm jumping 100, 200, 300, 400, etc. Each thing is.
That's what I was talking about.
Yeah. Yes, yes. Okay, yeah. You can do log plots, right? So we get this. We get to see some of these low-end things that were all clustered down in here. But, so log plots. There are several ways to do log plots. This is one. Log plots are good when your audience will understand them, right? And they're bad if you have to spend a lot of time explaining them. Not because you can't explain them, but because in my I'll go soapbox now. In my experience, those people who don't understand logarithms don't understand logarithms. And you're explaining it in 2 sentences, and a paper is not going to fix the problem, right? They don't understand logarithms, and they don't understand exponentials. So you got to know your audience. It's for a specific kind of reader. Here's another way, a separate plot. So this changes the scale. I've made a physical separation, so this is just a whole separate plot from this. I just kept the population axes the same. If I have to break scales, this is the way to do it, right? Don't do that. So there's lots of problems with this. Not the least of which is, again, we've created this cognitive problem where this is encoding one value and the length is encoding an extraordinarily different value. Right? This visually is not, 96,000 or whatever that's supposed to be, right? It's more like, I don't know, 2021, maybe 3,500, 3,000 something, right? Visually. And these are too subtle. So if you're going to do it, break it completely, make it a whole separate plot, make it clear that this is different. So the advantage to this, and it has problems, so I'm not saying this is right. The advantage to this is there's no mistaking. The reader knows this is a different plot than this. Okay? They're on a different scale, they're in a different place, completely separate. You could argue it would be better, in this case, to even have a separate x-axis and make them physically separate plots, right? If that's what you're going to do. Dual axes, meaning I have 2 axes that are different but are on the same axis. They're very confusing to decode for a reader. So use them very, very sparingly. They can easily mislead readers with respect to scale. It's actually difficult to do in most plotting tools, which is maybe a good thing. Usually, if you need to do this, separate them. It's not necessarily always a bad idea. I could imagine, this is in meters and this is in the dreaded imperial system, but they're the same thing, right? Elevation. So This way I get to know, I can easily look up between the two. Or whatever. And then sometimes there are reasons to break all the rules. I love this graph. I really do. How many people in here have children? Just a small subset. So you probably, if you have children, you've seen a graph like this before, right? So this is the chart that you give the parents take, I guess for their firstborn, before they've decided they don't care about that graph anymore. And they plot weight and height of the baby over time. So this is, when they're born out to 36 months. And we have weight and height, and these different lines represent the different distributions. So the center line here is 50 percentile. This is for boys. 5 percentile and 95 percentile on the outside. And then you can plot yours on here in zigzag, see how your kid does. For height and length, or weight rather and length, which is height. We can see in inches, we can see in centimeters. We've got this weird thing where we've got on this y-axis weight in pounds and kilograms, also length in inches and centimeters. We've also done it on this side, but we've shifted them because they're curved so we can see them. So I'm breaking every rule. The grid lines are extremely prominent, etc. But all of this is good because the purpose of this graph is for you to record on, right? You need the grid lines to be prominent because you're going to take a pen and color in a dot, right? That's the point of this plot. It's for reference, right? And it's all on one plot so that you can plot the trajectory of your child over time, right? It's for reference, right? It's not for me to communicate to a reader that this is how children grow. This is for me to track how my child grows, right? So it's a nice plot. I like it. It's really more of an empty graph for yourself, even though it breaks every rule. So I don't know if you guys one of our parents left, but did you fill out a graph like this, Peter?
Maybe my wife did.
Oh, I did. I only have the one, so I can tell you if we had a
We put
second
their
one.
heights on the wall though.
Yeah. I would not do it for second child because it's only so much I can care. Sorry. I have a caring threshold apparently. It's really also the thing that drives parents to doctors going, what's going on? Because your kid is in the 13th percentile of weight, and you think, oh, my kid is in trouble, but about 13% of kids are that weight or less at that time, so we all freak out. All right. And here's where I repeat things yet again. Most of this I'm going to say next week. All of it I'm going to say next week, so I won't bore you. That's it for what I have today. So short lecture today. So we've got plenty of time to do examples in R if we want to. Answer some questions. Everybody, I know I haven't graded the labs yet. I've downloaded them to my laptop, and I'm taking them with me on vacation, which I'm sure is going to make my wife super happy. So they will get graded soon. I know some people struggle a little bit with lab 2. I tend to think that's the hardest lab, the one I have you focusing on dealing with data. And as I've said before, the hardest part of data visualization is dealing with data. I don't think they will be as hard in the labs. But I think most people probably did okay. Yeah, struggled through it. Even though I was mean PGA data set. I was really mean. Sorry.
Is there a clean way to clean that up in code? Because
Yeah.
Can we get the solutions at some point?
Yeah, that'd be, at
I'll
some
put-
point, I would love to see like the actual.
Because I feel like I went like way around the world to get there.
Yes.
Yeah, like I cleaned it up, but it definitely was more of a brute force approach.
Well, yeah, I mean, easiest way to do it in code is still brute force. If you're asking the question, how can I look for those things and then fix it correctly, that would be hard to do because you'd have to understand the context of the error, right? In this case, the only way to really understand the context of the error without writing a lot of code is to look at the data and say, oh, I see. It the comma junior created an extra thing which pushed to another line, so I've got to shift the columns over one, add that number to the ends, and delete the line, right? So it's my solution does that. But it is explicit.
So if one did just fix the data, that wouldn't.
Say again?
If one just fixed the data, that wouldn't be the solution. Isn't just like deleting the extra comma in the CVS.
On a CSV file,
Yeah.
it means that you just have the.
Just open up the CSV and text it as delete the comma behind CVS. Reload it, and you're just fine.
You could do that, yes, but here's the disadvantage to that. Well, two disadvantages. One disadvantage to you is that you're submitting me an R file. So you can't, because I'm going to be downloading the file from the web, right? But two is if you're doing that, if you have this pipeline process where you're processing data each time, and the data is coming that way, then you're going to go every time you go edit the document, as opposed to fixing it each time, right? Which is better, right?
Well, I was also wondering if there's a way to load it, because I know in one of the first slides that you showed, was a way to read the data in and emphasize what the separator is or not is.
But the problem is that the comma is the separator,
I know.
and they use the comma. The problem is the person who enters that data was an idiot, right? And they used the comma even though that was the separator, right? So, but that happens, right? It happens.
And I was wondering if there's a way to like scan through. I tried all different ways to scan through and see if you can just delete the comma, like just click it, but then nothing was still like automated to be that
I mean,
place.
if it were me and I were getting this data set, regularly with this error, I probably would have written my fix in Python, and I would have parsed through, found the comma, and gotten rid of it, right? Or however you're going to do it, change the separator or how. But the way my fix in R was to just read the CSV directly, right? And then take all the columns from 2 to 11 and shift them over 1. Take the value out of the next row and stick it on the end. Then create a new data frame with the first 76 rows. I don't remember what it was, and then the last whatever. Skipping 78, I think is the value, right? Which still requires that I know exactly what the error is and exactly how to fix it, and it's all hard code, right? But yeah, but doing it in code is still better than fixing the file directly. But okay, but midterm projects. One of the things somebody pointed out that although I had edited my description of the problem from last year, I required people turn in a paper and a presentation. And this year I said just the presentation. Apparently, I did not purge that from every part of the description, but it has now. It's been corrected. Right? So I just need a presentation. I don't need a paper. Right? As nice as it is to get students to write more papers, and I really do enjoy that, I don't enjoy grading them so much. And like I said, in past years, I have this rubric, and students tended to get the same thing on a presentation as they got. It just seems silly. Why? Right? So you don't have to do a paper, just a presentation.
Yeah, but like the presentation, how many slides is it? Or is it just the graphs that we're going to do?
You have, no, you're going to do a presentation with slides. You can use as many slides as you want, but you have 7 minutes.
But I mean, what am I going to present other than the data or whatever, like other than?
So there are prompts in there, right, that you have to answer. Like, what was the objective? Why did it fail to meet those objectives? So I want you to tell the story, right?
So why did it fail from my point of view?
Yeah. I mean, why do you think this data visualization is not serving the narrative, right? And then your fixes. Why did yours serve the narrative better, right? Yeah. I'm not going to judge you on you're being wrong, right? So okay. Other questions? Yes, Lauren.
Not about the midterm, but about the next homework.
Okay, that implies I remember. But okay.
Okay. The step 3, I think you asked for a histogram, and the data is not a.
It's not categorical data.
Yeah.
or not numeric?
No, it's not numeric data,
Not
it's
numeric.
categorical.
All right, I will fix that. Let's take a look.
Can I ask a follow-up question to that?
Sure.
So the step right before that has us split up the main data set into two subsets. Do you want a histogram for each of those subsets, or do you want it just for the total?
Yeah.
Let's see what I did. All right.
I've been doing it.
I did it with the subset of both these.
Right, yeah. That's what I've been doing.
All right. Okay, I know what happened. All right. All right, so I think the simplest solution in this case is for me to drop question 3 altogether. And the March's question, what was it again?
Oh, sorry. I guess this is also follow up for question 4 for that scatter plot. Would you like that for both of the subsets or for the total data set?
Oh, it's question 4.
Sorry, it was for question 3 and 4, but if you're dropping 3, then it's
Oh, choosing separate subsets.
Yeah, I think, is number 2, are you saying there's 2 subsets, or is it one subset that fulfills both?
I did.
Oh, I might have read that wrong.
Yeah, I think you're on it. It's been a while since I looked at this data set. I will look and give a better answer without confusing people further. But I'll definitely kill question 3.
If
Yeah.
you just make it a bar chart instead or a column chart, it'll be fine.
Yeah,
Like, it does the same thing.
so in the past years, I had them make up their own data set about turtles. And the problem was when I graded it, everybody did something completely different. And so it was a lot of work to grade because I had to figure out how did they make a data set about turtles and what did that mean. And so this year I thought, you know what, let's just use actual data sets that are out there and blah, blah, blah. And I just left that question in there and changed the variables, and I didn't actually look to see if the question made sense anymore. So, yeah, all right. So question 3 will go away. Question,
2 needs some like understanding of what, because I don't
Yeah.
know if it's 2 different subsets you want or one subset with both of the variables in it. And then what do you use for the rest of do you use the original grading data that you gave for the rest of the questions, or do you use the subset data from question 2 to do the rest of the charts for like 3 through 6? I guess 3 through 4.
Yeah, all right. Let me take it offline and figure it out. All right. Yeah, it was not
I
clear.
know, I got through 4 and I was like, oh, this is hard.
Yeah. Okay. I will
So I thought I
work
got
on that
3
tonight.
and that was it.
Yeah, sorry. The problem with making a radical right turn from a previous assignment without pitching it through.
I could do that, make my assumptions on what I've already done.
I mean, in general, I'll say this. If asking me and getting me to clarify is the best solution, but if at the end of the day you just have to answer and it's not clear, that's exactly what you would do, right? And that's a good general rule of thumb. In general, one that I teach in my quant class, if you're facing a problem and there's an ambiguity in the problem, well, first of all, it's the real world, so there will be, right? And second of all, you're going to have to make assumptions, just be explicit what the assumptions are, right? These are my assumptions. Somebody else can come and say, those were the wrong assumptions, so your answer doesn't mean anything to me, but at least they're not going to be confused. So, yeah, all right. I feel like, nah, I'm not going to speculate. I'll just confuse people. I'll look at it again tonight. It's been a while since I looked.
I haven't thought about it, but I don't want to say anything, it might be wrong, but, could it be that you intended for us to code it first?
Code.
Yeah, and then create like, combinations of data sets based on code, is what you call it?
I don't think so. I think that was. Let me play with it tonight, and I'll clarify more. These are all great questions. Bruce.
So I don't know if I'm the only one that did this. Golfer problem, I put the VI editor to good use without thinking you know, the idea that it's not going to be repeatable under your environment. Do I need to take the hit and resubmit? I'm concerned that I've lost everything after that point, or what's my best strategy going forward here?
No, so what I normally do is, I might give you a few points for that one, but if I know what you did, I'll make the edit. But in general, when I'm editing code, or when I'm grading code, what I do is this, I run it. Okay? If it doesn't run, I try to figure out why. Okay, it doesn't get the answer and if there's some small change, I'll make the change and see what happens then. And there'll be a diminishing returns at some point. I'll say, it's too much work. But if it's just something small.
Okay, I mean, I documented in my thing, but
Yeah.
if we're being strict, then I'll resubmit them.
Yeah, no,
Save the final two probably.
Yeah, no, I might give you a point or so, or whatever it is. I have to look back at my rubric from last year, but I don't carry those through. As I said before, my labs are not about assessing your R abilities. They're just about making you practice so that you know the R. Right? So I'm usually pretty lenient in how I grade that. It's the projects that are the assessment. My students who've had me in quant or math foundations know that that's my general view of homework, is that homework is not about assessment. Homework is about practice. Right? So I grade because if I don't grade, you just won't do it. But it's not the same. It's not the same level of rigor because I'm not trying to see how good you are. I'm just trying to make you do